Today we're going to be checking out a Swiss-made automatic GMT watch from Maen, and I am really impressed with this one. Being an automatic GMT watch, the price is going to be a little bit higher than I typically look at here on the channel, but it's not too bad for everything that they're offering, and this just has a beautiful, gorgeous design and great finishing. Let's check it out. Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave, I live in Japan, and I love to collect affordable watches. Typically for me, that means watches that are under $500, but today we're going to be jumping a little bit above that price. This watch is about to be released. I think they're going to have a pre-order special that will come up to around $710 US. The brand Maen is based out of Stockholm, Sweden, so their prices are all in euros. Full retail price will jump up to around $750. Now, Maen is a brand that I've had my eyes on for a while. I've seen a lot of their designs popping up on Instagram. I've seen them in other reviews, and almost every one of them has just been incredibly classic, timeless, really beautiful looking watches. The watch that I'm reviewing today is a prototype version, which I am borrowing for the review. I will be sending it on to another reviewer once this is done. However, Maen did agree to send me a production version once they have been completed, which is why you saw the paid promotions flag at the beginning of this video. However, other than sending over one of their watches, they did not provide any compensation for this review, nor did they have any input into the content of the review. As far as changes go between the prototype and the production versions, I believe the only difference is that the production model is going to have C3 X1 grade lume, whereas the lume on the prototype is kind of a placeholder and is pretty weak. So I will not be doing a full lume breakdown on this prototype model because there's not really any point. Now, Maen says that they're all about trying to make the best quality timepieces for reasonable prices, and I think that's probably a good way to look at them. These are not budget watches. They're not trying to go for the absolute lowest price possible, but the prices are very reasonable. And again, I think that this watch definitely justifies the cost. I would say it's a pretty good value actually for the final product as I was able to evaluate it. This is a modestly sized 38mm watch, so it's on the smaller side, especially for this style of kind of dive style GMT watch, but it actually wears really great even on my 7.5-inch wrist. Now, it may sound like I'm gushing a little bit about this watch, but for some reason this one really grabbed me. Let's take a closer look and see if I can show you why. The Hudson 38 is a compact, well-spec'd, beautiful dive-style GMT watch. The choice of going with 38mm is one of the defining characteristics of this watch. More often, you're going to see 40mm or 42mm for these dive-style watches. And since I have a larger than average wrist, I tend to gravitate more towards 40 to 42mm for sports watches. That said, I absolutely love the way this 38mm watch looks on my 7.5-inch wrist. It has these really classic proportions that I think look especially good on the stainless steel bracelet that's included with it. And that slightly smaller size is just incredibly comfortable and wears very well. It's extremely well balanced. It doesn't move around a lot on my wrist, and I really appreciate that aspect of it. It's a lot more unobtrusive than a larger watch would be, and I often find myself forgetting whether or not I'm wearing it because it's so comfortable. Now, I call this a dive style watch because it's a GMT watch. It has a GMT bezel. It doesn't have the lumed pip on the bezel that you would normally get with a dive watch, but you're still getting a very impressive 300 meters of water resistance, which is 100 meters more than that 200-meter diver standard. So this is one that you would have no problem taking with you in any underwater activities. And Maen has managed to give you that high water resistance while maintaining a slimness of only 12.3mm. Add on to that high water resistance a sapphire crystal, and you have a very rugged tool watch that's slim enough and compact enough to be worn all the time. And when you pair it up with the GMT functionality and the ability to track the time in 3 different time zones, this makes for an excellent travel watch, or just the perfect watch for someone who has to communicate often across time zones. The watch is also paired with an excellent stainless steel bracelet with an elegant taper that goes from 20mm at the lugs all the way down to 16mm at the clasp. This is a 5-link bracelet with 2 of the mid links in polished finishing and the other links in brushed finishing, giving a very interesting and unique look. The articulation on these links is excellent, and it just flows very smoothly around your wrist, making for a very comfortable wearing experience. And you're also getting a very high quality, smoothly operating dual push button clasp with a very sturdy milled construction construction that offers great balance to the head of the watch. Clasp also has 4 micro adjust holes, allowing you to get a very precise fit on your wrist. I think keeping it on the stainless steel bracelet gives you the most versatility. This is something that is completely waterproof, and yet it looks elegant enough to go just fine with a suit and tie. But that 20mm lug width does give you the option to swap it out to different straps, and this watch does look great on a wide variety of straps. You can lean into those vintage looks with a nice leather strap, which I think gives it a little bit more of a dressy look. Or if you want to go the other way, because of the dive heritage of this watch, it looks great on a NATO strap as well. So this watch is giving you a lot of versatility. So specs and build quality are solid, but that's not everything. Let's take a look at the design. Design-wise, this is a very classic take on a dive watch or on a GMT watch. I feel like you're getting a lot of sort of nods to Tudor or Rolex, particularly with the flat sides to the case and the kind of sterile case back. But while the overall form of this watch is very familiar and classic, when you dive down into a lot of the details, there's some really cool little touches here. Take the handset, for instance. This is a unique handset that I haven't seen done by any other brand before. It's kind of a twist on the syringe hands, but with a different shape to them. It kind of reminds me of the silhouette of a skyscraper. In this case, it's a fully polished handset with one long line of lume running down the center of it. And I love it when brands come up with a good, unique handset for themselves. Rolex has the Mercedes hands, Tudor has the snowflake, and Maen has their own interesting twist on the syringe-shaped hands. Rather than put the date at the more traditional spot of 3 o'clock, they've moved it down to the more symmetrical spot at 6 o'clock, which is where I tend to prefer it. And the GMT functions have been integrated beautifully into this design. The GMT hand is a large orange arrowhead on the end of a very long, slender stick, allowing it to be very easily visible and to extend all the way out to the 24-hour rehaut, which allows you to read the time at the second time zone. And that rehaut or chapter ring has been beautifully designed, giving you 24-hour indicators going around the dial. And they've done a cool little alternating color pattern on that rehaut. You get orange markers at 24, 6, 12, and 18, and a more muted gray on all of the other numbers. It's a subtle effect, but when combined with the orange of that GMT hand, just adds the right amount of color to this watch. And speaking of interesting color choices, I also like what they've done with the bezel on this particular colorway, going with a kind of black and brown two-tone look. It's kind of reminiscent to the Rolex GMT Master root beer color scheme, but this is a lot more subtle than that, and I think it just looks great. The bezel is a unidirectional 120-click rotating bezel with 24-hour markings, which means that you have the option of either using the bezel just to read the second time zone, which is larger and easier to see than the rehaut, or rotating the bezel to give you the time in a third time zone should you need it. Now, the bezel action is excellent. The 120 clicks are very confident and have this kind of very clicky, tactile feel that's very satisfying to use. However, on a GMT watch, typically you would prefer to have a bi-directional bezel. There's really no use for it to only rotate in one direction. That unidirectional locking mechanism was meant for dive time bezels and only makes a GMT bezel a little bit more cumbersome to use. But since a unidirectional bezel is far more commonly used, they tend to be cheaper to manufacture. So this was probably a bit of a cost-saving measure here. Now, other than these unique style points, the watch also features a lot of very classic and just well-done finishing. The dial has this sandblasted, textured look that kind of looks like wet sand. It's something that you see pretty commonly on a lot of designs these days, but this is a pretty well done version of it, and it has a nice subtle look to it that makes it just a little bit more interesting. The dial also features embossed markers, and on the production version, they're going to be going with C3 X1 grade lume, which should give you some pretty good after dark performance. However, that X1 grade of lume was not implemented on this prototype, so I was unable to test it, and in fact, the lume that was on the prototype was pretty weak, but that is something that Maen is planning on improving greatly in the production versions, and hopefully they'll do a good job of it. The sapphire crystal also has a beautiful but gentle double domed effect that gives just a little bit of distortion at extreme angles, and it's also a boxed crystal, which gives it a little bit more of a vintage look. It's a very elegant looking crystal that I think matches the character of the watch perfectly. However, that boxed crystal does distort the rehaut a little bit, making it kind of difficult to read at certain angles. And since the 24-hour indicators on the rehaut are already pretty small, it does kind of make the legibility on that pretty tough. Finishing on the watch is excellent. I really appreciate what they've done here. It's primarily a brushed finish, which is, I think, goes well with the kind of tool watch aesthetic of this, but they've gone with a lot of polished accents with a great polished bevel along the tops of the lugs, kind of a polished bezel on the sides of it, and then those polished mid links on the bracelet. So the polished elements are kind of minimal compared to the amount of brushwork that's been done here, but it does add a lot of beauty and elegance to the design. And the brushing done is very fine and to an excellent standard. Overall, I think Maen has just done an amazing job at creating such a classic looking diver, while adding enough interesting little tweaks to it to make it something that's fun to wear and doesn't feel like a copy or a direct homage of any other watch. It's something that's extremely versatile, feels very high quality on the wrist, and just gives you a lot of confidence when you're wearing it. Now, this watch features a somewhat uncommon movement with the Swiss Soprod C125. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but first, just a quick plug for my t-shirt or hoodie shop. Check out justthewatch.com. You can get this design, as well as a lot of other cool watch-themed original designs that I put together. You can see all that on justthewatch.com. Okay, let's talk about this Swiss GMT movement. The movement in this watch is a Swiss Soprod C125 GMT movement. Now, Soprod is one of the smaller Swiss movement manufacturers, at least compared to brands like Sellita and ETA. And because of that, they don't have quite the track record that Sellita or ETA has. However, I've generally heard pretty good things about them. And personally, I wouldn't have any hesitation picking up a watch that had one of their movements in it. This GMT movement is kind of one of their lesser known movements. It hasn't really been used in a lot of watches, so again, maybe not a very long track record here. But it is Swiss made. It beats at 28,800 beats per hour, or about 8 ticks per second, which results in a noticeably smooth sweep on that second hand. You get a 42-hour power reserve, and perhaps most importantly, a GMT complication. The movement also features bidirectional winding, hacking and hand winding, and the hand winding is very smooth. I could not find any accuracy numbers published by Soprod on what you can generally expect from this movement. However, I previously reviewed a different watch that had the same movement in it, and that one was running very accurately at about +1 seconds per day. However, I wasn't able to get any accuracy measurements on this particular movement in this prototype unit because it seemed to be having some issues with its power reserve, which is unfortunate, but I don't suspect this to be a widespread issue, and were you to have a similar problem, I'm sure Maen would be able to handle it with a warranty exchange pretty easily. And I'd still be looking at this Swiss automatic movement as a positive for this watch. So wrapping all this up, this has got to be one of my favorite watches that I've had sent in for review in 2022. It's just such a great classic looking watch. You can really wear this watch every day, and it makes a strong case for being something like a one watch collection. You don't really need much more than this. Maen isn't necessarily breaking any new grounds in terms of design goes. This isn't something that's really far out there or really crazy. It's just a very solid, very timeless, classic looking design, and yet they put their own twists on it with their own handset and different details that they've added in here. And yeah, it really is a great quality watch at a reasonable price. Now, this watch will be launching on pre-order very soon. You can pick it up directly from Maen's website. I'll leave a link to it down below. And if you happen to be watching this video later on in 2023, it's probably already for sale, so go ahead and check it out. That will wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.